Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's flight is piloted by Randy Wright, who is joined by his first officer Jeremy Grapenton. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked position. We will be taking off shortly, and once again, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we're confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I shall delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before we may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, here it is. It is a long time in coming, but it is something that needs to be addressed. We know that every other radio program and venue that currently flies over the friendly airwaves gives you a little bit of information when it comes to addressing the problems that are facing the country. But we here at the Wright Flyer are a state-of-the-art radio program because we go the extra mile. We don't just tell you about the problems that are occurring in the world around us, and especially those problems that are currently facing the United States. We also go in depth to ensure that we not only let you know what the goals are towards achieving workable, real-world solutions that can apply to your day-to-day lives, we also devise a methodical approach to achieving those goals. And Jeremy and I both believe that this is truly what distinguishes the Wright Flyer from any other radio program or venue out there. And I bring this up because there is certainly a lot of problems facing the country right now, and these are major problems. And the number one issue that we're going to talk about, and I know it may seem as though Jeremy and I have been devoting a lot of airtime to this issue, but it is an important enough of an issue that I think we need to cover it, and that is this attempt to thrust gun control down our throats. That is always the solution that the radical extremist left-wingers have whenever they discuss these tragedies that have unfolded. And let's face it, since the June shooting at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, followed by that Roanoke, Virginia shooting where the TV reporters were shot while doing a live broadcast, to the Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon, to over this weekend, this last weekend in Fort Myers, Florida, there have been a string of mass shootings. Now, whether this last one was a gun-free zone or not, I don't know. But what we see in relation to all of these things is that there is a soft target there. And that is what these psychopaths and sociopaths go for. Yet, the government, under this current Obama regime, instantly runs out and wants to blame an inanimate object for all of the problems that are happening with respect to shootings in this country. In fact, President Obama has come out and said that not only is it a political issue, we should politicize on it. He was basically out there standing and dancing upon the graves of the victims before they had even been laid to rest in those graves. With respect to the Umpqua Community College shooter, he was targeting people because of their religious beliefs, yet the president made no mention of that. Now, this case that is unfolding in Fort Myers occurred on Saturday at ZombieCon, which is apparently the 9th annual Zombie Fest thing that has been going on in Fort Myers. And that actually has a bit of an impact on me because for 2 of the 3 years that I was going to law school, I was actually down in Naples, Florida, which is about 20 minutes to the south of Fort Myers. In fact, Naples itself, or Naples proper, didn't even have an airport, so we would land at the Fort Myers airport and drive down to Naples. And of course there's a lot of history in the Naples region. That's where Henry Ford and Thomas Alva Edison had summer homes together. It's where they have museums for both Ford and Edison. But apparently, back in 2006, a zombie movie had been filmed somewhere in Fort Myers, and that is where these zombie cons are held. And I'm assuming that this was also done in celebration of the upcoming Halloween holiday that'll be upon us in a couple weeks' time. But what had happened is, and someone really meticulously planned this out, because he was blending in with these costumed people that were carrying around fake guns. There were even those that had fake wounds on because they were attempting to portray zombies. So this was a full-on costumed affair where they were running through the streets, and they even had fake wounds, fake blood splatters that looked realistic. And so the police had initially reported that they had trouble in differentiating between who were true victims and those who were, just acting, that didn't really need their help or support whatsoever. But the shooter was able to get away, and I'm not certain as of the time of this broadcast whether the manhunt is over. I'm assuming that it's not, because I haven't heard anything come across the news wires with respect to it. But it shows that he had premeditated this, thought about this, had acted as a bad apple. And when I stop and think about this for a moment, whenever you have something where it's, we'll take the Vester Flanagan shooter, the gay black man that shot his former co-workers on live television. The liberal elitist, and I don't even like to use the term liberal, so we'll call them those Fabian socialist elitists that always push forward their Joseph Goebbels-style propaganda, came forth and said, well, no, not all of them are that way. Not all of them are bad actors. Yet, in the case of Dylan Storm Roof, the one who was the gunman at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, he came out and said that he was doing that for racist purposes partially, but also due to a perceived bias in the media, and because they saw him with a picture of the Confederate battle flag, the Southern Cross battle flag, they instantly attributed that meaning to each and every one that was involved. And they do that with gun owners too. But they wouldn't do it with Vester Flanagan when they found a gay pride flag in his Virginia apartment. They don't do it with Dzhokhar Tsarnaev or the other Chechnyan Mario brother, because, not all Muslims are bad. It's just the ones that fly planes into buildings and kill 3,000 people. And that's the other thing about these kinds of shooting incidents. They won't call the actual terrorists who kill more people than anyone else the true problems, but they come out and they say, oh, it's terrible that we have this ready access to firearms in the United States. Yet They're the ones that were running them down to Mexico in Operation Fast and Furious, in Operation Gunrunner, and yet nothing was being done about that. In fact, nothing has been done about that. None of the ones that were responsible for that, which was a truly illegal operation, have been held accountable. Instead, they're going to point the finger at you and me and all of us that are decent, law-abiding, gun-owning American citizens and say that we're part of the problem and therefore we need to restrict the right to keep and bear firearms, irrespective of the fact that it is contained in the Second Amendment. Now, folks, the theme of this entire show is to come up with practical working solutions, real-world practical solutions. Now, as we were coming up with the idea for this program, the shooting that has occurred in Fort Myers hadn't happened yet. But in the immediate aftermath of the Umpqua Community College shooting up there in Roseburg, Oregon, legislators in Michigan have proposed to take away the open carry, campus carry that had been passed because some people might be uncomfortable. In other words, they're buying into this cancerous doctrine of political correctness. And I'm actually going to turn this one over to Jeremy because he has a practical, real-world solution that would fix this problem in all 50 of the states. And actually, I share his opinion with this. It's something that I call for too. And with that, I am going to turn it over to him.
Thanks, Randy. The solution that I've thought of on this, and it's really, I can't take full credit for it. In fact, I actually have to give full credit to the Founding Fathers because it was their idea to begin with. It's the Second Amendment. Now, we've seen states want to infringe upon the Second Amendment. They want to have magazine capacity regulations for certain firearms you can and cannot have. If you have a certain firearm with a certain magazine capacity, you have to have what's known as a magazine button out in California for certain firearms, AR-15s, so on and so forth. But then you have states like Arizona that has Constitution carry. And this is the solution, folks. It's very simple. Sometimes the simplest thing is what needs to be implemented. You have Constitution carry. With the Second Amendment, the right to keep arms shall not be infringed. Period. That means no gun registration, no background checks, no purchase permits, taking a little piece of paper and dropping it off at your local law enforcement agency, which I just did today. Because I am a law-abiding citizen, until it's removed, I will follow those laws. But the thing is, when you want to compound all these other different laws, you want to have background checks. And this is something that I'm looking deeper into because when I just purchased my Ruger 1911 Government Commander 45 a couple weeks ago, I just picked it up, as a matter of fact, this past Friday, so it's actually been 10 days since I've owned it. The background check system has been different, and I'm going to follow up on this and dig into this for everybody, to where now with the background checks, every single transaction you can think of, whether it's person to person, private sale to private sale, FFL to private sale or purchaser, any configuration you want to think of that pertains to the transfer of one firearm to another person has to be documented now. And this is a thing that was almost instantaneous. And I say this because when my background check went through, they were finalizing it, that didn't come up, but 10 minutes later, it did for another individual that was purchasing a firearm or going through the qualifications, so to speak, to purchase a firearm. So, all these different instances that happen, and like here with Michigan, with this whole open carry thing, there's a bill that's been, it was actually passed by a judiciary committee of 5 individuals. It was passed 4-1, that the way the concealed carry law is still until this actually takes over, it won't go into effect until December. Any person in the state of Michigan that holds a concealed carry permit can openly carry in a public school to where their children go to school. They can, as long as they're open carry. What this law does is it takes away the open carry aspect of that, and only CPL holders can actually carry firearms in a school setting, but they would be allowed to do so in a concealed fashion. I have a problem with this. I'm not against concealed carry at all. There's pros to it, there's cons to it, just as there's pros and cons to open carry. And that's a debatable subject that many people will have for a long time. Unless we implement Constitution carry, then there shouldn't be any, discussion on it other than personal preference. But what this does is it actually creates a protected class of individuals. Now, granted, it's a protected class for individuals exercising their Second Amendment, but it detracts away from other individuals that don't have a CPL, and they're not being allowed to openly carry in the public schools to go in and pick up their children just because they don't have a CPL. This is the problem with gun regulations, folks. All these gun control measures, you're amplifying one person's Second Amendment rights and diminishing another's. There should be no distinction whatsoever between it. The Second Amendment is the Second Amendment, and it's to be applied equally across the board for everyone. This is why I'm an advocate for all 50 states becoming Constitution carry, as it should be. Because with the Constitution being the supreme law of the land, the Second Amendment, in accordance with that, being ratified to the Constitution, also stated, which we've mentioned in a previous show, especially dedicated to this aspect, the preamble of the Bill of Rights, makes the Second Amendment carry the full weight of the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. So if we have full Constitution carry in all 50 states, there's no more protected class. There's no distinction between one person exercising their Second Amendment rights being amplified over somebody else's and it's being diminished.
Right. And what we're seeing a lot of with these issues that come up is we have, just at this most recent nationally televised Democrat debate, the hopefuls for the office of President of the United States up there for the Democrat Party, they tried to purposefully obfuscate and misconstrue the actual purpose and intent behind the Second Amendment. And what I mean by this is they tried to limit it to hunting and recreational shooting. But that is not what the Second Amendment is for. It's funny. How can they read the Second Amendment and try and say, well, look, this well-regulated militia part, that means you can't have guns. And then, when they say that doesn't apply anymore, we're going to turn around and say, okay, well then, it's just for hunting and recreational shooting. No. When you read the Second Amendment, the well-regulated militia is the necessary part for securing a free state. And the true militia will always be we the people. And that is the part that they want to obfuscate out. They want to make it to be that, no, this means that you can't have and I hate this term, but quote-unquote assault rifle or assault weapon. That was the other thing that Bernie Sanders stood up there and mentioned on the debate stage. He kept talking about how, I really support a full ban on all semi-automatic weapons and any assault-type weapon whose only purpose and design is to kill. No, that's not its only purpose and design. You can go out and shoot paper targets with it. In fact, I suggested it's a lot of fun to shoot paper targets with it. That's a personal preference on my part, but Bernie is dead wrong when he says that these are just designed for killing. They can be used for hunting. So right there, they're already contradicting themselves. Well, these assault-type weapons, you really don't need them to go hunting. But that's not the purpose of the Second Amendment. That is not why the Second Amendment was included within the four corners corners of the Bill of Rights. Yet that's exactly what these people are always trying to say. And again, they ignore the fact that it's their asinine gun-free zones that have created these problems 9 times out of 10. Let's look at Umpqua Community College. Well, let's talk about a house of worship. I know that in certain states that in your carry conceal license, it's not just these colleges, but also houses of worship and other places where it says that you can't carry. Well, if that's the case, they have created these de facto gun-free zones, which just send up red flags to these sociopaths who are hell-bent on spreading mass chaos and carnage through their deviant actions, and they're going to go to that because they know that they are going to encounter the least amount of resistance there. And that's what we have to keep in mind when we look at these individuals. When you try to root out what it is that motivates them, it's that they are evil. And see, that's another thing that the extreme radical left-wingers in this country don't want to address. They don't want to acknowledge that there is a true distinction between good and evil, because that means that their perception with respect to moral relativism is turned completely on its head, because there really are evil people out there who are driven to commit these vile and heinous acts, and no matter what law you put in place, you're not going to stop them. And that's part of the problem here. When you look at the logic behind these restrictions, they may be put out there with good intentions. I have my doubts on most of them, but certainly in the case of the Michigan legislature, I think that this is put out there with good intentions, but as the old adage goes, the road to hell is paved in good intentions. When you give these radical left-wing gun grabbers an inch, they will take not only a mile, they'll take 1,000 miles. They'll take whatever amount they can get and slowly whittle away at your fundamental unalienable rights, and they'll do it without hesitation. And this is because they are diametrically opposed to you having the ability to think and act for yourself. They literally want to control every aspect of your life. They will do anything and everything to gain more power for themselves. Do you honestly think that a Bernie Sanders cares about you? Do you honestly think that Bernie Sanders is up there doing what he's doing to help you out? Here is a man that is going out and saying that he is a democratic socialist. He is attempting to say that that is why he is getting as much support in the polls as he has. And it's asinine. And when you were watching that Democrat debate, it was like standing in the Karl Marx Symposium. I was actually surprised that maybe there wasn't a rubber band gunman who would come out there and start popping him off in the eye, and then Hillary could sit there and recall the days of how the button flew off of her Hot Lips pantsuit when she thought she was getting shot at back when she was a senator. I think that was during a visit to Iraq or Afghanistan during the Bush presidency, but I distinctly remember that. But it turned out to be false. And you know, it's like how Brian Williams, they all look the same, had come out and fabricated these stories about how he had been shot at in Iraq by a survivor of World War II, and maybe the Japanese Navy was there sending kamikazes up at him at the same time. That's the kind of logic these left-wingers operate from. They can no longer distinguish or differentiate between lies and the truths because they are so caught up in their own web of deceit. But they do have detrimental impacts and negative implications on we, the people, the true, decent, law-abiding citizens of the United States, when these people sit here and attempt to strip us of our ability to keep and bear firearms in a direct violation of the Second Amendment. And that's part of the other problem with it, is when you see that they're putting these solutions into place, and I call these false solutions because that's exactly what they are. They want to look to other countries. In fact, that's what Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders had been saying during the debate. So they look to Europe. Europe has these gun-free zones. But as I recall, during this last summer, when they had that shooting on that Paris train by those radical Islamic fascists, how well did those gun-free zones work? They didn't work at all. Why are we implementing the failed policies of Fabian socialists in Europe or throughout the rest of the world? We fought our war of independence to escape that sort of nonsense, and here we have the Democrats trying to drag us back into solitude and slavery to the government. Folks, as Jeremy and I have repeated oft times on this show, if you want to find real-world practical solutions that will impact your day-to-day lives, you need to make the government go back to the proper scope and application of the United States Constitution. We need to put the limitations back on every level of government, from municipal all the way up to federal, and we do this through a long-term plan. We can't just keep approaching this with the idea of instant gratification, or that we will be able to elect a savior or a messiah that will somehow be like a new Ronald Reagan that will drag us all the way back to conservatism with the snap of a finger. That's just unrealistic. If you look at what these Fabian utopian socialists have done, they have drawn out a century-long plan, and they have stuck to that plan. And they have infiltrated the education system, the media system, and other facets of our daily lives, and have slowly begun building towards this utopian socialist dystopia. Because, folks, if we lose our fundamental unalienable rights, then we have nothing. Because the ultimate fundamental unalienable right is the right to life. And again, you're not going to hear these radical left-wingers sit there and say that that is the most important right, because that's going to rub against their whole abortion shtick. But this is where we are right now, and we have to be more proactive.
You know, I'm going to go back to this terminology of assault weapons. And the reason I'm going to do this is just going to amplify everything you just said. With everything you've said, it can all be wrapped up and packaged under one label: incrementalism. This is where the assault weapons come in. Bernie Sanders says we should get rid of all semi-automatic and all assault type weapons. Is Bernie Sanders that naive to think that it's just firearms that are assault weapons? No, he's not. He fully understands that anything that can be used to do bodily harm or to assault somebody can be construed and considered to be an assault weapon. Take the basic term assault. It is the unwanting or unexpected touching or invasion of a person's private space. Words can be assaultive. It's when you act on those words, that's when the battery comes in. This is what people don't understand about the term assault and battery. Now they want to take and amplify it and give it more credence by diminishing the full scope of it and logic of it by saying it's an assault weapon. Get rid of the assault type weapons, AR-15s, AK-47s, semi-automatic shotguns, long guns, 30-06s, 308s, so on and so forth. All handguns. They want to get rid of all of that, and they want to apply these terms like assault weapon to create the scenario or the synopsis that these are things that can be used and only things that can be used to assault people. How many people have been assaulted with hand tools? If you look up the FBI statistics, you'd be quite surprised and amazed at how many people are bludgeoned to death a year with a claw hammer or stabbed to death with a screwdriver. You'd be amazed. But they have to start somewhere. They want to start with the thing that has been bolstered up as being the biggest demon of everybody's emotions, and they play on everybody's emotions incrementally. They start with the guns, and then they go all the way down the line. Next thing you know, folks, your family outings and barbecues on Memorial Day, or whatever holiday through the summer, 4th of July, you and your families would not even be able to enjoy a game of croquet because croquet mallets will be labeled eventually as assault weapons. This is what their whole plan is. Anything and everything that they don't want people to have, they demonize it and they break it down bit by bit by bit until they have full control. They don't want people to own these things. Why? Because it's a means of protecting themselves. It's a means to ensure that their underlying core, fundamental, principle, unalienable right to life is removed from them. People want to say, oh, well, these guns are for hunting and this and that. You know what? Give me a spear. Give me a wooden stick. Just give me a stick. Cut off a tree limb. Shape it into a point. And if you practice enough, you could become a lethal killing machine. After all, this is what our ancestors, way back in the day, used to hunt with. And as people grew and they understood how technology advanced, of course, the arms and the weaponry is going to advance with the society. This is what they don't want. They don't want it to get so far out of hand to where they lose complete and total control and the people are allowed to actually defend themselves. They want control of you. And in order for them to do that, they take away, bit by bit, incrementally, the various different things that allow you to have control over your lives, allow you to accept the responsibility of defending yourself, being proactive. You are the first line of defense in any situation where anybody wants to assault you or deprive you of your rights. It's not the law enforcement's job. They're reactionary. They show up after the fact. It's not the government's job to protect you. Well, they make laws to protect us. No, that is not what they're doing. They are making laws to, basically, in a nutshell, deprive you of everything you have. Which they have no authority to do because they do not grant rights. The rights that we have that are unalienable cannot be taken away except by our Creator, unless you utilize your rights to the detriment or disparage of somebody else's, and then at that point, you're not exercising your rights, you're committing a crime. This is what people don't understand. And it's, again, all incrementally, every bit of it. And it comes by way of using these propaganda tactics of labeling. Let's label certain firearms that look like the military or look like they're big and bad and mean as assault weapons. It's a play on words. They play on people's emotions. And when people learn how to take the emotions out of it and institute the only thing, which is a proper, clear understanding and working knowledge of what your constitutional rights are, because it is your Constitution. It belongs to you, not to them. And when they're allowed to label certain things that will detrimentally tear down that Constitution, and we allow that to happen, we will surely lose everything.
And that's the entire design of it. And let's go back to that image that you brought up, speaking of having that nice little dinner with the family at the park, going out for a grilling. Well, they're already going after that with the EPA and trying to say that that's unhealthy food and causes global warming. Remember, folks, they're not just going to stop with our fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear arms. Remember Michael Bloomberg, one of the most prolific anti-gun propagandists out there using his vast fortune to attack decent, law-abiding citizens' ability to keep and bear firearms throughout the country in this wild-eyed propaganda campaign. Well, he had banned sugary drinks, large sugary drinks, in New York City. He fits this progressive mold, and this incrementalization that Jeremy mentioned a few minutes ago actually ties directly into the entire progressive mold. That is why the name is actually progressive. It doesn't mean that they are progressing the nation forward, far from it, because nothing could be further from the truth. They're not out to progress the country back to the Constitution or to progress the country forward by adhering strictly to the tenets and principles contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. What they're trying to do is progressively or incrementally chip away at the solid and steady foundations of the country which are contained within the Constitution so that they can replace it with this utopian socialist nightmare. And this is why they play these semantic games. They don't want the American public to wake up and realize exactly what it is that they are pushing forward. They don't want us to understand that their agenda is diametrically opposed to the rights that we are endowed with by our Creator, and that no one has the right to take that away from us unless we act in a fashion where we infringe upon the rights of others. Therefore, in the case of this shooter who attacked those party-goers, or the celebratants of that festivity, he has lost rights because he acted in such a way as to deprive the fundamental and unalienable right to life of the victims. The same can be said for anyone that commits murder and commits robberies or whatnot. They have infringed upon the rights of others. That is why they are punished and put in prison when caught. Or if they've murdered someone and are convicted in a capital punishment state of committing capital murder, they will be put to death. And that is not because the right can be waived. It is because they misused the right and infringed upon the rights of others. And that's why I say that those nefarious politicians and those utopian socialists who are attempting to strip us of our fundamental rights in the name of safety and security are no different than criminals, because they are acting just like the criminals, because they have no respect for the American people. If you ask a criminal if he or she has respect for the people, the answer will be no. However, if the criminal is unaware of whether and who is carrying arms, then that criminal is going to be less likely to go out and commit any type of violent crime. And the reason is he is going to instinctively look for the path of least resistance, like water. If you dam up water, it will try and go around it. It will try and go to the path of least resistance. And the same is true of these cowardly sociopaths who are hell-bent on carrying out their machinations. Yet, what do we always hear from the left? It is always going to the grounds of working with their notion of blaming an inanimate object for these things. Folks, I have never once seen my guns get up on their own, run down the street, and shoot up a Quickie Mart. I just never have. That is not something that they are capable of doing. Instead, we have to objectively examine what really empowers these sociopaths, psychopaths, these evil people, because let's face it, there is no other way to describe these people than to call them what they really are, which is absolutely evil, from engaging in the acts that they have planned. Certainly not by stripping the law-abiding citizens of their fundamental unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. So when we look at this situation logically, we have to determine why it is that they were able to go to these places and use them as a target of least resistance. In the case of Umpqua Community College, as Jeremy and I have discussed on this show many times before, it came down to the fact that this was a gun-free zone. And the Oregon legislators were already impacting the right of the people to keep and bear arms by implementing even stricter, more draconian gun control legislation to ensure that the law-abiding citizen was deprived of the means to defend themselves, and then the school itself had gone out and prohibited the security guard from being able to be armed, which just created an even larger zone of danger, and which I think, if we're going to talk about suing anybody, why are we not talking about suing the school that sat there and made this gun-free zone policy, and not only that, broadcast it to the public via their website so that the little sociopath could log on to the website and see that this would be his target of least resistance. Then, at the same time, you have the left-wingers, again, doing generalizations with, say, like law enforcement, after, say, the Trayvon Martin case, or the Freddie Gray case. They're out there attacking law enforcement. But at the same time, they're sitting there saying that we should be stripped of our fundamental unalienable right to keep and bear firearms, which means that we would really be exposed to greater danger. You see, this killer had premeditated the entire thing and plan there in Fort Myers, Florida. He knew that he could blend in with the crowd, and he was using this as an opportunity to move forward with his machinations. And as a result, he was able to get away, and they will eventually catch him. But I can already hear the radical left-wingers like Jerry Rivers, a.k.a. Geraldo Rivera, coming up to the microphones and saying, look, we can't say that we can use the Second Amendment to defend ourselves or to excuse these actions. We just need to implement socialism, true socialism, and strip everyone of their fundamental rights. We're going to blame an inanimate object for all of the problems that are occurring here in blanket statements, in these broad strokes of stereotypical generalities and generalizations. But I'm pretty sure that any of you who are listening to this show right now would never see your gun on its own jump up, tap dance to a jig on your table, then run down the street and, empty a clip into Johnny Dirtbag and Crack Horse Sally. I just don't think they would do it. But, according to the Bernie Sanders type, that's what it would be. If it was a real quote-unquote assault weapon, it would probably just have a flag that goes out and says bang, or a flag that has a picture of Hillary Clinton on it. That would be a real assault to the eyes, a real assault to the senses. But somehow I don't think that that is what they are trying to convey the message as. But we need to stand up and be as proactive as they are. When Obama is standing out there saying that we need to be single-issue voters to his left-wing zealot, the real zombies, his voters, on gun control, and to try and push against the rights of the American people, that is a clear violation of the people's fundamental unalienable rights. And that is what he is openly advocating. And that is criminal. It absolutely is.
Well, here's the thing. That part of the reason why they're able to do this is because they've again, played on people's emotions. See, these hoplophobes, and for those of you who don't know what a hoplophobe is, it's actually a person that has a fear of guns. Now, there's a genuine fear of firearms in some people, whether it's due to their upbringing or whether it's due to their lack of understanding of the firearms themselves. That in those cases, that could be a true instance of a phobia, a legitimate fear of firearms. When you have individuals that are protected by individuals that carry firearms, going out and saying, we don't need firearms, we don't need these kinds of weapons in public. Now, Ben Carson has said something to this effect regarding, AR-style weaponry existing within urban areas. Now, a lot of that was taken out of context by a lot of people. Many people say, well, he's anti-Second Amendment. He's just... Well, I can see where they're going with that, because, again, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If Ben Carson's idea of not allowing certain types of firearms to be within certain types of areas, urban areas, well, that's going to cause a problem. Because, again, criminals have no regard for the law. Those would be individuals that are law-abiding citizens who have an AR-style type rifle. They would be outgunned and outnumbered by the criminals that are going to say, we can't have them here, all the more reason why we want them. That's your typical natural rebellion. Everybody is rebellious to a certain degree. Criminals even more so. Criminals don't like being told what to do. They want to make their own rules, their own laws. They have their own set of standards that they live by. And when someone tells them they're not going to be able to do this, they go out and do it anyways, just to show them, you can't tell me what to do. Not to detract away from all of this, but that's just one example. On the other side of it, I can't really see why eliminating those types of firearms in those types of areas would be a good thing. Again, it would be putting law-abiding citizens who are now becoming victims because they don't have the capacity, they don't have the means of protecting themselves, because you have to meet force with equal force. In fact, the law says you have the legal right to use equal force, including deadly force. These individuals are brandishing and committing crimes with semi-automatic AR-style weapons that have 10, 20, and 30-round magazines to them, and all an individual is left to defend their home with is maybe a 6-shooter revolver. It's not really equal force, is it? People would make the argument, well, a firearm against a firearm. No, it's not true equal force, because you eliminate the capacity of the individual being able to fully protect themselves. Now, taking away from all of that and dealing with individuals like Michael Bloomberg, who wants to institute and has instituted and paid for out of his own pocket these national gun buyback programs. See, he's utilizing the fear of people. Again, when you label something and you play on the emotions of individuals who have a lack of understanding, they're going to be more susceptible because, A, it sounds good to them. It sounds right. It makes sense to them because their senses are so dulled by the propaganda of and browbeating over and over and over that they succumb to it. They're brainwashed when it comes to things like this. Hey, that sounds good. Let's make it to where it's harder for people to obtain a firearm because we have stricter background checks, and anybody that has any type of mental health history is not allowed to own a firearm. Even if they were involved in a shooting or some life-threatening situation where they've been traumatized and they have to see a therapist to work out their issues because it helps them. Well, you've seen a therapist. Yeah, this comes up on your background check. No, we don't want you to have a gun. Because something happened at work, somebody committed suicide in front of you and it traumatized you. No, we don't want you to have a gun. This is nothing but the emasculation of the American people as a whole. It's incrementalization, again, taking people and attaching certain aspects of their life and using it to twist their emotions into believing something that isn't true. They want to continue on with this over and over and over. To me, it's very damaging. This is one of the things that the Founding Fathers warned about. They warned about this in no uncertain terms. It may be vague to some people. To other people, it's clear as day. When Benjamin Franklin was asked, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he says, a constitutional republic if you can keep it. Time and time again, Randy and I have mentioned it is our obligation and duty to maintain our rights, to maintain our self-responsibility, to maintain the very things that allow us to protect ourselves and our ultimate unalienable right, the right to life. If you don't have the means of protecting yourself or your family and protecting life, then you have nothing. Because surely at that point they will take everything from you. The economy doesn't matter. What you own isn't going to matter. You may be able to have your smartphones, your big screen TVs, your high-def TVs, your luxury automobiles, live in a $2 million home, nice big home. You may even have a job, and everything may just be hunky-dory for you. Your bills are paid, food's on the table, you have a family, children are provided for, so on and so forth. You're happy and content. You become complacent. And when you allow those things to interact with you emotionally and your understanding of being able to protect your life and your property, those things that you have, when you're willing to sacrifice it, so long as you maintain those material possessions, as long as you have those, you're okay. How are you going to be okay if you can't protect them? If you are willing to forcibly give up your means of protecting them? That does not make sense to me at all, and it shouldn't make sense to anybody. And you want to talk about common sense? Common sense gun control laws. Again, I hearken back to the Second Amendment. You can't get any more common sense than that. It's written clear as day. A fifth grader could understand this. Please, if any of you happen to know a fifth grader, please bring them on board so that we can hear from them.
It's still better than anything we'd hear from Bernie Sanders, and you want to talk about a lack of common sense, I point back to Jessica Jin, that 24-year-old alumnus from UT at Austin, who sits there and says that she's going to strap on a strap-on as a protest to the open carry and campus carry laws that have been implemented. And look, part of the problem that we encounter here with respect to exercising our fundamental unalienable rights is that there are these social deviants, not just the Jessica Jins of the world, but some of the professors at the University of Texas at Austin that say, all right, even though this is now the law of the land, we're going to do whatever we can to severely limit where law-abiding American citizens are going to be able to carry their firearms on campus because they instantly jump to the conclusion that firearm owners are irresponsible people. They almost want to say that it's a machismo thing, that it has to be an extension of a male genitalia, or I guess in the case of a female, the envy of male genitalia. But the fact of the matter is, what it really comes down to is they don't trust us with firearms because they doubt their own ability to control themselves with respect to those things. They know that they feel bitter anger. I mean, this is why you have a bunch of the so-called climate scientists that are pushing this hoax known as global warming, sitting there saying that those who disagree with their position with respect to so-called man-made global warming should be prosecuted under the RICO statutes. Some are even going so far as to say that maybe they need to be snuffed out, executed. This is right out of the Nazi playbook, folks. That is the type of socialist mentality that has been a failure wherever it has been implemented. And this is why I always find it laughable when people like President Obama come up and say that these things that they are wanting to implement are somehow new, never tried before. But it's actually not the case. Utopian socialism has been around with us since the Fabian Society, since Karl Marx first put pen to paper with Friedrich Engels in the 1860s to create that horrible and atrocious read, Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. But speaking of the Communist Manifesto and these radical socialist doctrines, when you look at how Karl Marx was trying to say that history is linearly progressive, meaning that it just moves in one direction, that of a straight line, you know that that's not true. Because if you look at the annals of history, you will see that it is cyclical. And that is the problem with these core philosophies and principles that the left actively engages in. They are based on faulty premises, such as this idea that history is linearly progressive. Now, with respect to Marxism, what Marx was trying to say with that is, first, a society starts off in a feudal era, a feudal society where you have the landed elites that control every facet and aspect of the life of the serf or the peasant. And actually, where we get the word villain is from this. The villain was the person who worked the land, was the peasant. He was a vilain. It comes from Middle English, which was heavily influenced by French, but you had that system. Then it would move to a mercantilist system with the establishment of, say, cottage industries, and from there to capitalism, from capitalism to socialism, from socialism to Marxism, and then somehow, when you have this strong communist government, and the whole entire world is one communist fluffball that just sits there and drools all over itself, the government would somehow wither on the vine. Of course, that would never happen due to human nature. And of course, that has always been the problem with Marxism. It has never been based in reality. It has never taken into the account true human nature. It's funny, Marxists always try to decry capitalism as a system of greed, and they speak of greed as if it is some bad characteristic of humanity. But they don't talk about the greed of the government. They don't talk about the greed of those nameless, faceless, unaccountable bureaucrats that will do anything to illicitly amass greater power for themselves at the expense of the citizens. Do you honestly think that once the world became entirely communist, that somehow these people would just instantly give up on their desires to amass more wealth and power for themselves? If you looked at the Politburo in the Kremlin, and all of the upper echelon of the Soviet machine, were they ever going to give up their power? Not easily. Not easily at all. It took a military coup and a revolution again to topple them. And that was after a prolonged period from 1917 until 1990 to 91 that the Soviet Union lasted. And that was sheer and absolute unadulterated corruption from top to bottom, attempting to keep people down. While the people were lining up at bread lines to get fed, these political elites had every amenity and luxury that they could. And it's entirely a top-down system that is rotten from the core. Now, of course, the academicians are going to sit there and say that pure Marxism has never been tried anywhere. Well, that's because pure Marxism cannot exist in the real world. They're going to try and say the same thing about pure capitalism, but the fact of the matter is, with the very early United States, you did have a de facto true capitalist free market country. And that was part of the purpose of the government, is to defend the rights of the people. And one of the fundamental unalienable rights of the people is the pursuit of happiness, or the notion of property. And part of capitalism is based on this entire notion of private ownership. But these utopian socialists, these fascists that are attempting to work these gun-free zones and every other type of dystopia nightmare upon the American people, don't actually believe in the right of property. In your first year property law class, at least in mine, we mentioned that property ownership was like a bundle of sticks. There are rights, these series of rights which are akin to a bundle of sticks that you have when you own your property. You have the right to kick people off. You have the right to keep your house private. And that's why the Founding Fathers had included the Fourth Amendment in the Bill of Rights. And don't get me started on how the judiciary has been whittling away that fundamental unalienable right almost to the point of no return. But since the theme of this show is solutions, again, we have to talk about how we will work to a solution with respect to these problems. And the first step is that we have to realize that this cannot be done through instant gratification. Our political foes, and yes, I am actually going to call them political foes, have worked together to create this 100-year plan. We too have to devise a 100-year plan to where we are just as relentless as they are to once again force the government into strict adherence of the principles of the United States Constitution. And we have to start it at the grassroots level and work up. But we keep pushing. We never relent. That's the problem. Jeremy had mentioned the complacency. We have got to get beyond complacency and become extremely proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of our fundamental unalienable rights. There is no way around it.
You know, I have another solution. And this is just an idea. Just think about it this way. We have all these legislators that want to make these laws. Since this happens to be a very adamant issue with the Second Amendment, we all know that criminals have no regard for the law. They understand it. In fact, criminals, in most cases, understand the law better than most lawyers do. Why is that? Because they've had a lot of practice. They certainly know the law better than most first-year lawyers, rookie lawyers. Why? Because if they're career criminals, they've had a lot of practice. They've engaged in criminal activity for the voluminous years of their lives. So here's the solution. This is part of the solution. Instead of having lawmakers up there thinking that they know what's best for individuals, why don't we have lawmakers that start thinking like criminals? Because see, after all, laws are there to hold people accountable, especially those who would break the laws, the criminals. So if you enact or create laws that are tailored in such a way to where as if they were thought up by criminals themselves. Wouldn't that make the laws that much harder on criminals? I think it would. In fact, I know it would. In my line of work, what I do, this is one of the key things, the key ideas that I employ. I think like the individuals that are tantamount to my employment. I think like them. I understand how they operate. Therefore, that allows me to implement things within the scope of my duty and ability to be able to stop them from doing certain things before they even think about doing them, or to handle certain situations that may come up because of them doing things that are against policy or violation of our facility. Having an understanding like that, see, when you have people like Bernie Sanders, and hell, let's even delve real deep into this, people like Bobby Rush, Alcee Hastings, Chuck Rangel, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, let's name them on both sides. When you have individuals that understand, or should have a working understanding of criminal activity, some of these individuals have engaged in it themselves, but yet they want to make laws that are appealing to criminals. See, these laws that they make are more of a strict interference with the United States people, the law-abiding citizens, than they are with the criminals. We need stricter gun control laws, more rigorous background checks. Why? For the law-abiding citizens to be encumbered by it, therefore making it easier for the criminals to get their hands on these firearms illegally, because that's what they're going to do. You're essentially creating a black market. You make laws that are tailored specifically to being harder on criminals and easier on law-abiding citizens. Don't make laws that will punish the law-abiding citizens, because that's what they're doing. And again, this is all part of building up that complacency and utilizing the emotions of the American people because it sounds good. Oh, we're going to make it harder for criminals to get firearms because the background checks are going to be harder. Wrong. You're going to make it harder for law-abiding citizens to obtain firearms to be able to protect themselves, thus creating more gun-free zones and a less secure place, because again, the first line of defense for securing an individual's right to life is the individual themselves. You make it harder for them to obtain a firearm or any means of protecting themselves and defending their life and their family, you're creating victims. I'd like to see individuals start thinking like criminals when writing this legislation and these laws. I'd also like to see them utilize some common sense. They talk about common sense gun control laws. It's common sense to, limit the capacity of the magazine size because, hey, less bullets means that's less people they can kill. Wrong. A proficient marksman with any firearm can cause just as much death and devastation as an individual who has no training whatsoever, that is a loose cannon, that has bare basic minimums of how the firearm functions, take the safety off, have the magazine loaded, point and shoot, type basic fundamental operations. You have someone that's proficient that is a criminal. Their means of understanding and acquiring those firearms. You can give them a 22 bolt action rifle, single shot bolt action rifle, and they will be just as more devastating, if not more devastating, than the amateur that is much akin like Dylan Ruth, or the individual, the gay black man who shot his former co-workers. It's not about the firearms, folks. It's not about people not being able to defend themselves so much. What it boils down to is the use of the terminology common sense gun laws. It is completely devoid of any common sense whatsoever. But then again, if common sense was common, everyone would have it.
And Jeremy, you mentioned how you wish they would think like criminals. I'm going to step out on a limb here and say that they already are thinking like criminals. The reason why Bernie Sanders wants to strip away the fundamental and unalienable right of law-abiding American citizens to be able to keep and bear firearms is because he understands what it is to live off of the people, to be a leech off of the people, to be a burden to the average, decent, hardworking American citizen. And therefore, he is thinking like a criminal when he's saying, how can we make it easier for more people to live off of the people and advance themselves as I have? Perhaps he is a bit like, you had robber barons, as they called the early industrialists, such as Andrew Carnegie and J. Rockefeller. Well, now you've got J. Rockefeller's family up in the Senate, or I guess he's retired by now, but you did have him in there. So could we call them robber legislators or robber government agents? They're the ones that are going out doing whatever they can to ensure that their power is strengthened and that we, the people, just have to keep bowing our head in pure acquiescence to their power grabs and their attempts to strip us of our fundamental unalienable rights. So, in a way, they are thinking like criminals, because they are stealing, they are robbing from us, and they're not using common sense. A lot of your average criminals don't use common sense, like a criminal that would sit there and steal road signs, stop signs, and then when he's caught on the dash cam, try and sit there in court and argue that it wasn't him. Even after they projected it up on the screen, it wasn't him. Or, I'm going to come up clean on a drug test. They know that they've just been smoking dope the day before, but they lie anyway because they think it'll have no application to them. Well, you see the same thing with these politicians. They sit there and they lie. You have John Boehner, who, after the results of the 2014 midterm elections, said that he was going to stand up to Obama. Now, neither Jeremy or and I'm going to go out on a limb again here and say that probably most of our listeners also didn't believe that because of the old adage that actions speak louder than words. And with the current GOP detente wing that is running the party, or the show right now, they don't think that their lies will come back to affect them. That's the difference. It will come back to affect them if we, the people, are once again awake, alert, vigilant, and proactive in the maintenance and defense of our fundamental and unalienable rights. You know another way that a lot of these politicians are thinking exactly as a criminal would? You've got the case of, let's look at Trayvon Martin, and then Freddie Gray, and all of these other supposed racially motivated things, where you see these criminals' families, and in some cases the criminals themselves, standing up there and saying that we need to get rid of the stand your ground laws. Basically, they're wanting to whittle away at your right to self-defense. They want to strip the law-abiding citizen of the right to self-defense because it would make it easier for them to go in and steal, rob, assault, brutalize, whatever other devious crime that these malcontents think up. It'll make it easier for them to accomplish this. And then you have legislators who think up of bills like those where it used to be defined that you could only use self-defense after you had used every avenue of fleeing to escape from it. Now, of course, that is asinine. If your life is in danger, you have the fundamental unalienable right to life, irrespective of what these radical left-wing zealots and extremists are trying to say. You have the right to defend yourself. They are just trying to put these laws in place to strip you of your ability to defend yourself and to take away your God-given rights, because they too are like a criminal element. It's as though they are kindred spirits with these malcontent, social deviants that are plaguing our society in general. But I want to go also to the fact that you have a true criminal in Hillary Clinton. Because when you look at what she did with that private email server, she was breaking the law. And just like a lot of the criminals, she thinks that somehow she is exempt from the law, that she is such an elite that the law cannot touch her, that there has to be a separate code of conduct which applies to her and her minions and underlings that shouldn't apply to anybody else. And she has directly put the national security of the United States at risk. But then you have President Obama running out to make sure that the mainstream media hears his point of view on this, and he does all the backpedaling that he can achieve in order to ensure that the presumptive frontrunner for the Democrats is not harmed. And then during the debate, you have Bernie Sanders giving her a high five, and that, too, would be a sign that she was not working within the confines of the law. Folks, it really does boil down to this, that these utopian socialists who are digging into their bag of tricks to try and create this separate legal system for themselves will use whatever power they can to ensure that they are distanced from you. That is totally diametrically opposed to the vision that our founding fathers had with respect to this country. As Jeremy and I have said time and again, the doctrines of self-responsibility, self-accountability, self-determination, each and every one of those is a fundamental asset and aspect of what builds the constitutional Republican form of government that we have. We are a representative republic, and we have been endowed with this birthright, this inheritance that is the greatest bequestment that any people on the face of the earth have ever received, because our system is based on these natural law principles that have determined that the fundamental and unalienable rights of the people supersede any level of government and any authority of government, whether it be at the municipal level up to the federal level. That was the brilliant aspect of what George Mason had concluded when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia. What he had concluded there was totally new, totally revolutionary. This idea that people hold sovereignty, that the country belongs to them. As Jeremy said, the Constitution is yours, it's mine, it's his, it belongs to us, not these government wannabe potentates, tyrants, and despots. And once you realize that, folks, you can be greatly empowered to ensure that your fundamental unalienable rights are never encroached upon, because the Constitution is yours, and we are the true sovereigns of this nation.
Keeping with the spirit of the purpose for this particular program here in our listeners, if you haven't noticed by now or realized that what we're getting down to, the whole underlying point, is that if you look at all the problems, all the issues that our country faces, whether it's poverty, unemployment rates high, the economy in the tank, the housing market, gun-free zones, abortion, unlawful legislation being passed and then actually being upheld by the Supreme Court. Obamacare. All of these things, when you look at these things, the underlying principle is simply this. You have to get back to the core principles of the Constitution. Period. That's all there is to it. That is the solution. That is the ultimate solution. Because if we go back and look throughout history, 224 years ago, let's go back and look, 224 years ago, 1791, these things that were put in place. The Constitution was ratified September 17th, 1789. 2 years later, the Bill of Rights ratified to the Constitution with all intents and purposes of said Constitution, thanks to the preamble of the Bill of Rights. Our country was growing. It was birthed as the ultimate bastion of freedom in the entire world. And it was prosperous. It grew. Did we have some problems early on? Absolutely. Absolutely. There are some bugs that need to be worked out. The Alien Sedition Acts need to be taken care of. But then, as time went on, 20 years or so, 22 years, you had Marbury versus Madison come up, which established judicial review, which laid the groundwork for many, if not all, of these ailing issues that our country faces. Then again in 1810 with Fletcher v. Peck at the state level. And so it begins. And it's been a constant struggle, to say the least, bantering back and forth, what's constitutional, what's not. The scope and meaning of the Constitution has been derided, abused, and usurped over the years and done away with. It's not taught in schools anymore. Parents are even embarrassed when they finally realize the grand scheme of things of what's happening with all these issues, when they start to come home and affecting them. And then they realize that, gee, if the Constitution was just adhered to, if people understood it and held those accountable that are supposed to abide by it, our lives would be much better. I encountered one such incident this summer while standing guard, my civic obligation, protecting the men and women in uniform at the career service center, the recruitment centers for the military here in my hometown. I had an individual show up just out of nowhere, drove by, honked a horn, waved, decided to go to one of the local grocery stores and brought back gallons of water. Gallons of water. It was a hot day. He brought that back out of the kindness of his heart. He did that. And he had his children with him. I was so blessed that day when I was able to give that man and his family the pocket constitution that I've carried for the past 6 years. It was tattered. The edges of the pages were dirtied up, stained up. It was a mess. But you know what? The words in there were still as viable then as they were written 226 years ago. And when he admitted that he was embarrassed because he had forgotten these things, he had a reality check. He had an awakening. And to this day, to my knowledge, he still sits down with his kids with that Constitution and teaches it to them. Folks, that is what true Americanism is. That is what we need to get back to. And until we do, we could throw out all these solutions we want, but until we embrace the only solution that can fix these problems that ail this country, this great bastion of hope and freedom and liberty, until we get back to that, our suggestions are just going to do nothing but fall on deaf ears. And it's just going to continue to thrust us in a downward spiral.
But as long as we reach the ears of one person, as long as we convince even a singular individual that their fundamental unalienable rights are the true rights, that our Constitution is this sacred document based on natural law principles, then we have done something right. We have begun the movement to regain the trust of America, to regain the ability to rebuild America. Folks, if we are able to get people to embrace the Constitution again and to start demanding that their governments at the state level, that all of the government agents at any level of government starts to go back to strict adherence to the fundamental principles, the foundational principles of the United States Constitution, then we will start the Renaissance here in America. If you think that the economy is bad, examine in an objective fashion, what is it that makes the economy bad? It is the impermissible interference by unconstitutional agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency, all of these other nameless, faceless bureaucracies that are completely and totally unaccountable to the American people. These are what are strangling the economy in the United States. And no government agent or actor will be able to create jobs. It is not the government's job or position, nor should it be, to create jobs. That is the role of the private sector. That is why Americans have to be entrepreneurial. That is why we have to be willing to work hard to build and achieve. But how can you work hard to build and achieve when you have this overbearing government bearing down upon you, suffocating our small businesses with these overzealous regulations that have to do nothing with what the government is supposed to do? We can no longer simply sit back and watch the world move around us. We can no longer allow these nameless, faceless bureaucrats to march into the annals of history, laughing all the way, catcalling at the American people as they tear our Constitution, that most sacred of documents when it comes to a government, to the shreds. It's funny. I saw a meme over this past week where it showed Obama sitting there saying, "Look, Obamacare has been the law of the land for 2 years. Stop trying to change that." Well, folks, the United States Constitution has been the law of the land for over 2 centuries. To Obama, to any potentate, to any of these wannabe tyrants and despots, stop trying to change the United States Constitution. Stop trying to fundamentally transform the American people. We are sick and tired of it. Your measures are not wanted. Your quote-unquote hope and change is not desired because you cannot change the natural law principles of the United States Constitution. Those are timeless. When you meddle with that, you are just kicking sand into the eyes of the American people. When I say that we as American citizens have the greatest birthright of any people on the face of the earth, it is because we are the true beneficiaries of the greatest document that has ever been crafted or drafted by the hands of mankind, that being the United States Constitution. When Obama sits there and says that we ought to accept the so-called Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act because it has been law, yet then at the same time is continuing to move forward with his idea of attacking the longest contiguous constitutional document in the world. Yes, our Constitution is the longest running Constitution in the history of the world that bears repeating on each and every show because of these potentates like Obama. It shows just how warped his thinking is. He wants us to embrace his utopian socialist dystopia that he's trying to force upon us with these failed policies like Obamacare, yet he wants to tear down the greatest aspect of the national character, heritage, and identity of the American people. And I can honestly say that these left-wing potentates, tyrants, and despots want to deprive us of the United States Constitution because they absolutely loathe and despise everything that it represents. These people are reprehensible. There is no other way to describe it. They want to force us into the chains and shackles of a command economy, of a centralized government, and that is everything that our founding fathers fought so hard to escape from. Yet they would thrust us right back into it.
You know, I have another solution. Call me silly. But this has actually been mentioned on our show before numerous times as well. When these unconstitutional acts are implemented, such as Obamacare, such as common sense gun control, such as things creating gun-free zones, and inhibiting the individual citizens, the sovereign citizens, from the ability to defend their life. You know, there's a word in the human language that's universal throughout the world. No. It's very profound, very impactful. No. It has a lot of meaning to it. It's one of the smallest words in the human or in the English dictionary that has one of the biggest and largest definitions. But the definition is so succinct. There's a lot of synonyms for the word no, and a lot of expletives too that can be used in conjunction with each other. That's, you know, certain individuals would find rather amusing. But all in all, it's very emphatic. 2 letters, N and O. See, when the people realize, when you, our listeners, come to the grips with reality, and many of you already have, it's those that haven't yet, that haven't heard our shows, that we have not had the privilege of speaking to. Until those individuals realize and grasp the understanding that the Constitution belongs to them, there's no legislation whatsoever that can deride or detract their rights away from them. And it can be solidified just by saying no. See, this is another instance to where the progressive left and these Fabians have hijacked yet another word. They want to take the word no, and they want to say, no, I'm a woman. No, it's my body. You can't tell me what to do with my body. No. And they're very emphatic about it. See, this is all a game in the grand scheme of things. Okay, they have their set of rules that they want to force everybody to play by. This is something that I've told my kids in raising them. You don't allow other people to bring their set of rules to your court, your home turf, your field, and force you to play by them. You make them play by your rules. And the rules that the American people need to force these individuals to play by is very simple. It's outlined in the United States Constitution. Those are the rules. Those are the only rules that are applicable. And the caveat to that, the addendum to it, is the emphatic use of the word no. It's time we start taking things back. Personally, taking them back. Let's take back this notion, or these twisted, decrepit uses of terminology like no. Let's take it back. Let's give them a taste of their own medicine. No, you're not going to violate my rights. No, you're not going to trample on the Constitution. No, you are not going to create legislation that deprives me of life, liberty, and property, and the means to secure it and defend it. Those are the rules that need to be played by. And when we bring those rules to the field, and we hold them accountable under those rules, and they want to break those rules, they need to be punished for it, in a manner of speaking. They need to be removed from office through election process of electing individuals who will follow the rules. Not only follow the rules, but hold other people accountable and hold other people to following those same rules as well. And most importantly, are willing to being held accountable should they break the rules. This is yet another solution that people need to get behind and utilize. Tell them no. What are they going to do? If enough people stand up, and it would only take 1,000 people, even 10,000 people, to say, no, you're not going to penalize me for not having health insurance, or the type of health insurance you want me to have. No, you're not going to do this. No, you're not going to hold me to a standard that you want to create more legislation to allow criminals to obtain the means of causing chaos in a gun-free zone while depriving me the ability and right to defend my life and my child's life. No. When people hold to that, what are they going to do if 1,000 individuals in a community do that? Arrest them for telling them no? Folks, all that's going to do is give you that much more authority. It will give you that much more authority, and it will weaken them. Their sails that they're skirting around it with, all the wind will be sucked out like a vacuum. They'll have nothing. They can't punish you for saying no. They cannot force you to follow a law that is indicative of violating the Constitution. Because all laws are to be made in adherence to the Constitution. And when they're not, they're unenforceable, and all you have to do is tell them no.
And that is why we always say here on the Wright Flyer that you, the American people, must be vigilant and proactive in maintaining and safeguarding your rights. The ability to say no is but one small part of that. That is also why we are completely dedicated to the mission of spreading the knowledge of the Constitution. When you, me, and Jeremy, and everyone around has a fluent working knowledge and understanding of the United States Constitution, we are empowered to such a degree that we can constantly and unequivocally tell the government no. You know, when you look at the government, everything about it is designed to allow itself to grow. That was the one thing that the Founding Fathers feared the most. That is why they attempted first to move forward with the Articles of Confederation as opposed to the United States Constitution. The Anti-Federalist sect was completely worried that the federal government that was being created under the United States Constitution would be too strong. They understood that this powerful central government, with time, would grow decrepit and corrupt, and that it would move in such a way as attempt to besmirch and belittle the fundamental and unalienable rights of the citizens. Believe it or not, that was the biggest fear that George Mason had after he had finished helping draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia, and after he had convinced James Madison to include the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution. Folks, that's what's so amazing about our founding fathers. They possessed such vision and foresight that they understood that the government would open this proverbial Pandora's box in an attempt to gain ever greater power for itself. That is why there was the separation of powers. That's why we had the three separate branches of government. That is why we also had the tenets of federalism developed. The true relationship that exists between the governments of the several states and the federal government is one that follows that natural law principle that George Mason and all of the other founding fathers wholeheartedly believed in. We, the people, are the true sovereigns. We have delegated a certain number of powers and authority to the state governments, and the state governments, in a representative capacity, then delegated a certain number of their powers and governing authority to a truly limited federal government. And what I mean by a truly limited federal government, any branch of the federal government, be it the legislative branch, the executive branch, or the judicial branch, must trace its power back, its authority to act as a government entity, back to a power which is specifically enumerated to it from the four corners of the United States Constitution. They do not possess plenary or near absolute power. They do not possess a general police power. Yet that is what they salivate for. It's like Pavlov's dog. If they hear the idea of, well, the federal government should be possessive of plenary powers and general police powers, they start to want that. Obama keeps saying that he doesn't have the power to legislate and that he can't go around Congress, but then he purposefully misuses his executive order powers to do just that, to go around the proper constitutional constraints and limitations on his power. He is trying to become a king, just like what we faced with King George during the American War of Independence. This is why I say that these radical extremist left-wingers are actually neo-feudalists. And this is also why I debunk what Karl Marx attempted to say in all of his writings when he proclaimed that history is linearly progressive. No, it's not, because it's going full circle. Under a true Marxist system, or as true of one as can be implemented in the practical and real world, they are neo-feudalists. You have the potentate elites, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Eric Holders, all of these people that refuse to adhere to the law and believe that a separate law or code of conduct applies to them and doesn't apply to we, the people. They are trying to force us into this feudalist mold. But as Jeremy said, the most powerful word that we can say to these potentates, these dictators, these despots, these tyrants is no. No, we are not going to allow you to build a fascist system like Nazi Germany or National Socialism here in the United States. No, we are not going to let you deprive us of our fundamental unalienable rights and strip us of our Constitution, that greatest birthright that any people on the face of this planet possess. We are not going to allow you to take these away from us because they are ours. They're not yours. You do not have the power or authority to strip them from us, but they think they do. Just as they think that they know better than all of us on how the government is to work and operate, just as they think that they can propel us to this new age. Why is it that these socialists always and repeatedly attempt to implement the same policies, irrespective of the fact that it has failed time and again ever since it's been tried throughout history? And see, this is the thing that the historical revisionists cannot get around. They cannot get around the fact that socialism, everywhere that it has been implemented and tried, fails. It is an abject failure of a policy. But these people are so arrogant. People like Obama are so arrogant that they think that it's just because the wrong people have been attempting to implement, and they know how to implement it and have it really work. But folks, The solution comes back to what Jeremy and I have been saying since our first episode here on the Wright Flyer. It must come back to strict adherence to the United States Constitution. That is the only rule book that should be applied. When we say that we are a nation of laws and not of men, that means that the law, meaning the Constitution, the principles of that sacred document, applies equally to all of us, irrespective of what station we hold in life, irrespective of our wealth, irrespective of anything. If you want to know where the true sense of egalitarianism is and equality is, it is within that aspect of the United States Constitution. And so long as our government continues to operate in a way that's divorced from that, we will continue to suffer the problems that we are suffering now. That is why the Constitution is the most important aspect of our government, and there just is no way around that.
You know, it should be mind-boggling to individuals that something so simplistic as the United States Constitution, if you were to print it off in, let's say, a 12 or 14 point font, you'd have front and back, 7 pages maybe, thereabouts. It's a very short read, but it is a lifelong document. As Randy has stated before, it is timeless. There's no way to completely understand and fully grasp the contents of the United States Constitution. Why? Because it's not the Constitution that is changing. The Constitution is it's static. Okay? It's not a living document. However, life is not static. Our society is not static. It is always changing. New things always come up that need to be addressed in a constitutional fashion. But in order to understand the full gamut of those things, inside and out, and to understand whether or not those situations or scenarios that arise hold constitutional muster or not, a working, understanding, and knowledgeable context of the Constitution needs to be held. You have to be able to know exactly what it is that is attached with the Constitution in these new scenarios. Obamacare, again, going back to it, Obama says it's been the law of the land for 2 years. Wrong. That's what he says. Realistically speaking, and constitutionally speaking, it never was law and it never can be law because it is contrary to the Constitution. Absolutely contrary to it. So, having an understanding of the Constitution that I do, that Randy does, that our Air Marshal Nelson Ward has an understanding of, we've put the time and effort into studying the Constitution, immersing ourselves into it, devoting the time to have a working understanding of it, so that we can bring this to you. The caveat to that is a very simple one. There's things that we may not understand fully about the Constitution, but you, our listeners, when you grab your Constitution, you read it, you understand it, and then you engage in conversation about it, spreading the word about it, teaching it. You may come across individuals like myself and Randy and our friend Nelson, to where you may reveal something to us that we never even thought about. That is why it is a timeless document, because everybody will be able to understand it in different ways, but there's no interpretation of it. It cannot be interpreted. It's actually forbidden to be interpreted. as per the Ninth Amendment of the Constitution. The interpretation took place when the Founding Fathers put pen to paper. It was their ideas, their thoughts, their debates, their conversations with each other, their correspondence back and forth through letters that was all put together into this document. That's where the interpretation took place, and that was the finalization of that interpretation. But having an understanding of it, again, Randy may have a different understanding on one aspect of the Constitution that I do, and we've talked about it. In fact, we've had conversations in the past to where he's brought up an issue, I've looked at it in a certain aspect, we've talked about it, and then we ironed it out, and then now we both have a full working understanding of that particular aspect. This is what needs to be done, folks. We all have to engage in this. Randy and myself, neither one of us will acquiesce to the fact that we know everything about the Constitution, because we don't. It's impossible. It is impossible for every one of you to have a full grasp and understanding of the Constitution in its entirety. It is not possible. That is why there has to be conversation about it. That is why we have to study it. We have to learn it. We have to get the best, as the Founding Fathers would say, a more perfect understanding. In a way, that's what they implied in the preamble of the Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union. Perfection can never be achieved here on earth, but we can get as close to it as humanly possible that we allow ourselves to. And having a working understanding of it, conversing with each other, having a dialogue, a conversation, so on and so forth, that's just going to amplify that. That's going to embolden it. And when that gets emboldened, and when that is put out there, and you take it, that aspect, and you couple it with the aspect of telling them, no, you're not going to tear this down. You're not going to infringe upon this. It creates that immovable wall that they will try to get around, tunnel under, or climb over top, or even try to punch through, and it'll be completely impervious for them, because they will have nothing to stand on. They will have nothing that they can go on to tear it down, to get around it, to get through it. People want to talk about building a wall to keep these illegal aliens out. Why don't we build a wall first with understanding what our constitutional rights are? Understanding our document, our unalienable rights, how to protect them and defend them, and staying vigilant, securing them. Let's put up that wall first. And every other wall that needs to be built from that point on will essentially build itself.
You know, when I say that each and every American citizen needs a fluent and working knowledge of the United States Constitution, as well as their fundamental and unalienable rights. What I mean by that is just like a language. No one can know perfectly how a language works, but you don't have to have a perfect understanding of language to say that you're fluent in it. You just have to have enough of an understanding to know that you understand the principles and are able to think about it and see how it applies. As Jeremy said, the interpretation aspect of it is disallowed by the Ninth Amendment, but that does not speak to application. And that is what we should all be focused upon, because it is applying the Constitution to our modern lives and to this modern society that gives us the insight that we need to be able to move forward and to ensure that the United States of America remains a nation of laws, not of men. We should never allow a separate political leading class to be established, because that tarnishes everything that the United States Constitution stands for and represents. Pardon me. And that's why we have to stand up to Obama and to these others that are attempting to strip us and deprive us of our fundamental and unalienable rights and say no. And, folks, the power still rests in your hands, because that is the natural law aspect of it all. That is what our founding fathers believed. That is the way in which this more perfect union was envisioned when they drafted, ratified, and gave us the Constitution. Think about that, folks. You have inherited the greatest governmental document that has been created in the history of all humanity. No other people on the face of the earth can claim that. But you, by your birthright or naturalization right as an American citizen, have earned that. You have that. But just as Jeremy and I have said on previous programs, and will continue to say, those rights, those fundamental, unalienable rights which you possess, that great birthright which you have earned, also comes with the duties and responsibilities to be proactive, to be responsible, to defend those rights, and to ensure that you don't encroach upon the rights of others. Those duties are not easy duties. But then again, no system worth having, or no thing worth having, ever comes easily. And that is why our entire system is based off of the notions of self-accountability, self-responsibility, self-determination. The self is the important part, because you, as an individual, form up the body known as we, the people of the United States of America, who are the true sovereigns of this country. And folks, as long as there is air in our breath, Jeremy and I, as your captain and my first officer, we vow to keep moving forward with this mission to spread knowledge about the United States Constitution. And Jeremy's absolutely right when he says that we do not claim to know everything there is to know about the United States Constitution. But we are working on being ever more fluent in it. And we want you to be ever more fluent in it as well. With that said, it is now time for us to begin our descent. I'm sending the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Once again, I'm Randy Wright, your captain, and as always, joining me is my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. Folks, we really do appreciate you coming on board and flying with us here at the Wright Flyer. After all, we do all of this for you, and we want you to keep the discussion going, and we hope to see you again here real soon. Thank you for flying the Wright Flyer. We will be landing it shortly.